One focus is our sovereignty. This is a prophecy. This is do or die, either with us or against it, said it honestly. This is a prophecy. 7th generation, and we're here to make it happen. Come and ride with me.
Welcome to the Future Generations podcast. We want to thank all of our listeners. We are in season 2, episode 2. This is my co-host Pablo.
Hi guys, how y'all doing?
And I'm KP. And we have a very special guest today, Juan Zapata. So I just want to read you a little bit about his background. So Juan Zapata was born in Coahuila, Mexico, and he was undocumented in the U.S. until the age of 16. He served in the Army Reserves and specialized in Mexican genealogy, finding over 80 native documented ancestors. And he was able to trace back to the, I'm going to make sure I say it correctly, Huachili tribe.
Yeah.
Yes? Okay.
The Huachil one.
Is it
No, it's okay.
Wachichil?
Yeah, perfectly.
Wachichil.
Huachichil. Okay, awesome. He is a published sci-fi author and he graduated from an HBCU. He is on TikTok as Arid American and he has 6,810 followers. So thank you so much for joining us and for responding back to my message. We're very excited to have you here, especially because of the topics that we are going to be discussing, especially throughout the season in our podcast, because I feel that they are conversations that a lot of people are having online and they're having in person, but they're not having the correct guidance when they have these conversations, which I was telling Pablo about. Social media is a great space, right? You're able to connect with people, hear different perspectives, hear different stories, which I love. But it can be also very dangerous, right? Because then you'll have so many mixed opinions, and with no guidance from actual elders, I feel like it can become like a toxic space. And I was very excited to learn about your background and your story. And so I had some questions. If you don't mind just sharing about your life growing up. What was your experience as someone that was not reconnected with their indigenous culture yet?
So growing up was hard in Alabama because there wasn't that many like Latinos or Hispanics around here. It was mostly just white people and black people. So I always felt like I was just a huge foreigner, and I was treated that way more so in middle school and high school. I just faced a whole lot of racism growing up, and I always felt like the odd man out. I remember in my class, there must have been like less than 10 Hispanics in my whole class. In my whole graduating class of 500, there's probably like less than 10 Hispanics from what I remember. And it's not like I was friends with those 10 because they had us spread out in different classes. So it's not like, I was always by myself essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that reason, like I just faced a whole lot of racism from people like just calling me like beaner, like where's your green card? Staring at me like I was trash, things like that, and just taco burrito, all that stuff, right? So growing up, I just had a negative like image of myself as far as being Mexican. Like I was ashamed of it, and I was undocumented, so a lot of those insults did hit close to home. Come like, well, shit, like to an extent, like even though they're being horrible to me, like I know there's a grain of truth. Like I am here legally, but yeah, so it was just hard facing that. So I didn't grow up with any indigenous culture. Like my family has been like detribalized for like centuries, right? So I didn't even know that we had like indigenous heritage. Like I didn't know much like growing up. It's just I just went with the Hispanic Latino label,
Mm-hmm.
and that's pretty much it. So, but I was always confused by that because I didn't know exactly what was the logic behind the label, right? And I remember one time in high school, like because I was like the whole race question always like confused me, right? Remember one time I like asked somebody, I'm like, oh, maybe I'm like half Aztec or something, and then they like laughed at me. They're like, no, there's no way. Like, what are you talking about? So I was like, okay. So I was like, maybe I'm like a half a Spaniard or something, right? And then they still laughed at me and said, oh, there's no way. So I was like, so what the, what the hell? What other options are there? Like, I don't understand. Like, I was just really like lost here on the whole thing. And so there was a huge like loss of identity, not knowing the history of the background or any of that information, none of the family history, which later on I learned a whole lot about from my genealogy work, but yeah, it just caused issues, and then obviously with the racism, I didn't like being Mexican or having that Mexican heritage, so yeah, it wasn't a good mix for
Yeah.
a huge part of my life.
Yeah, and I feel actually that this country does that to a lot of marginalized groups, right? That are disconnected because there's so much racism and stereotypes. Words are powerful, and what people say, it's going to hurt to the core. And I also grew up undocumented. I was undocumented until my late 20s, actually, which I shared with Pablo. And it was a very isolating experience, even though I am in a city where there's predominantly Hispanic people, because assimilation, right, creates kind of like a barrier where you can't just talk to people, oh, okay, they're Hispanic, they might have these same experiences, and it wasn't the same. There was a lot of fear, there was a lot of confusion, angst, and at the same time, you have to like kind of watch who you can tell. I just remember my parents telling me, like, you don't tell no one, you don't tell anyone out of protection. And so the way I compensated was by trying my very best to learn and dominate the English language. So anytime someone pointed out my accent, I went back and I read and read again. Because in my mind, I was like, okay, if I learn English well, I will be accepted. Come to find out that doesn't happen. But that's a part of what assimilation does to you, right? And people throughout history have had their own experiences, right, in terms of what assimilation does, which ultimately it kind of breaks your spirit. That's basically at the root what it does. So thank you so much for sharing that part of your journey with us,
You
which
did.
I
Oh, sorry.
thought was
Yeah.
essential in why you would go into genealogy work. Go ahead, Pablo.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like listening to your stories about hearing microaggressions and negative sentiment about your heritage, and also like it almost in a way discouraging you because you're telling us that you really didn't have a lot of idea of what your heritage was, but almost even being discouraged to looking into it because of facing that racism. And I can relate to that growing up because I'm a member of the Carizo Crudo tribe, which today has a lot of support historically and in the public here in Texas. But when I was growing up, it was like, oh, I thought they were gonna. When my dad said we were native, he was gonna say like Comanche or like we were Sioux or something like that. Something that I had read from a book or knew about from a book, right? And I was telling this to my dad on another podcast that we have because he tells me some stories and we talk. But I was telling him like one of the biggest moments for me was being able to find sacred sites, be there physically. I'm realizing now as an adult that I had the opportunity to have a lot of this heritage and these stories growing up. But also you have that backlash of racism and microaggressions and just resentment that kind of deters you from looking into it more. So when I didn't see like the Carizo Come Crudo people in history books, I didn't feel validated. And I also was, deterred from looking more into it. I was lucky to have the opportunity to have this life changing experience where I went to Lake Allen Henry. I was asked by Texas Park and Wildlife to come record some cave paintings. And the cave paintings told a story that was an oral tradition that was told in my family. And so I was like, oh, okay, so I don't need a book. It does take, just finding out who your ancestors are in a lot of ways and finding asking questions to your older relatives and your elders. And it's when she told me about your story, like that is an amazing story because one, a lot of people don't go into these spaces lightly. For some of us who have been assimilated into being U.S. citizens, it's a subdue and conquer mentality. It's like, oh, I'm going to own who I am instead of having some kind of humility and trying to understand who your ancestors are and what their struggle was and what that might mean for you today. And that's beautiful that you were able to connect that way because imagine having all of that racism and all of that negativity but having no support and not finding that for yourself because now you have some way to process it, also a sense of pride of who you are and a true sense of identity that doesn't seem like anyone is going to deter you from now, especially since you're wearing it proud.
Mm-hmm. And I had a couple more questions, Juan, and you're free to answer them if you want, or if you feel they're personal, you don't have to share either. How do you think your encounters with racism and microaggressions shaped the person you became now? Do you feel like they shaped who you were? Do you feel they pushed you further?
it pushed me further in the sense that I don't think it was a good thing, but I like the one benefit out of the racism and the microaggressions is that it pushed me to try to be as successful as possible because I was treated like trash by all these white people and all these Americans that I was like, I want to beat them like at their own game. You know, I want to be more successful. I want to go to the college. I want to get the degree and
Mhm.
just beat them with the whole, financially, right? So
Mhm.
it's like, so that's why I just tried my best. My parents pushed me, and I didn't want my parents to like struggle financially with me. So I got like full ride to go to college because I tried really hard on the ACT, and then I started my career, and I got a house at an early age at 23. So I did all these things to like try to make a point that it's like I can be just as successful, even though I was here legally, even though you guys wanted to treat me like I was garbage.
Mhm.
I wasn't born into wealth. Like a lot of the people around me, they came from upper class families and they were white and it's
Mhm.
like I didn't start that way, but I'm still further ahead than you are. You know, it's not to like be bitter, but it's to make a point. Like all the things they said about me weren't true. You know, so
Exactly.
that's what pushed me.
It's a driving force, to prove what you already know about yourself.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And
definitely.
were you always interested in genealogy and history?
But history, yeah, I was always fascinated from an early age. Like when I was like 10, like I started watching like King Arthur movies and well, I mean, I know that's like fantasy a little bit, but
Uh-huh.
like I
Uh-huh.
just watched all those like ancient warfare movies like Romans, like you know, just any medieval movies and stuff. So already had a really big interest in history in general. But once we got to genealogy, like once I first started with like a DNA test because I took one because I was
Mhm.
curious what it would say because I was at a complete loss. And then
Mhm.
the results like shocked me because I was like, okay, so this is like the admixture. And then I was like, well, what's the history behind that? How did that happen? And so I started looking into that and reading up on it. And
Mhm.
then I discovered it's like, even though, the DNA test could say you have a huge block of like Native American DNA, it doesn't really tell you much beyond that. It's just an estimate, right?
Mhm.
Right.
So I was like, that doesn't help you in general. Nor does like if you just get the results and you're like, oh, well, I'm just Aztecs. Like you can't just say that, like that's you have to actually research what your actual background is because it's a disservice to your own ancestors. You don't even know. You're
Mhm.
just claiming whatever.
Mhm.
So I discovered that this Mexican genealogy group is just called Mexican Genealogy on Facebook. It's run by a guy named Moises Garza
Mhm.
and it has like 15,000 members. So highly recommend you get on that on that Facebook group because a lot of people will give you a lot of good advice. There's a whole lot of free resources, and if you don't know how to read the Spanish cursive, you like post it up on there. People will translate it for you.
Mhm.
Um, so they're very good people. So I learned slowly because I got on there and I started posting, and I wanted to see how you would start, and I started watching like some of the videos they got on there, and I didn't know how to read Spanish cursive at the beginning at all. Like I was fluent in Spanish, but I didn't know how to read the cursive. So I learned very slowly. The way I would suggest it is if you don't, you pull up like an English cursive chart. It's the same letters, so it doesn't matter. I mean, English or Spanish cursive chart. And then just have the document zoomed up like on ancestry.com or family search is another site you can use. Have it really zoomed up and then just try to like match the letters. And
Mhm.
eventually your eyes will, they'll associate the patterns. It's kind of time consuming, but eventually it will. Or you do that, but you also post it on like on let's say Mexican genealogy, and then they'll transcribe what it says, and then go back and try to like match what they're saying to those words like on the image, like and so you'll pick up the patterns. It just takes time, but that's how I learned how to read the cursive. It just took a couple, a good amount of hours of like trying,
Mhm.
right?
And as someone that actually has gotten services from Juan genealogy services, I can tell you that it's legit. I got really emotional with the information that Juan gave me because I kept hitting like a brick wall when it came to some past ancestors just because my family didn't want to discuss some things. So I definitely recommend those services. And actually, I wanted to ask you when you did reconnect with your tribe, like how was that moment for you? If it's able to be described.
So it was well, first of all, once I started getting enough of the records and I like made the
Mhm.
association because I had to do a whole lot of research and I kept finding a bunch of Native American records like in San Luis Potosi, especially.
Mhm.
And once I dove in and did a bunch of the historical research, I saw that like the conclusion was like the Guachichios, like it was just too overwhelming. And there's so many ancestors, like I found like over 80, and it's
Mhm.
like so many branches. It's like and they were the majority of the people in that state. So once you associated all of the facts, um, I don't know, it was just amazing to me. I was like, so here's my answer, right? So I didn't know that there was anything in San Luis Potosí. Like I thought it was all assimilated. And
Mhm.
so what happened is I ran into other descendants. Like there's a guy named Isaac Mole. He
Mhm.
was he had already like had a whole lot of experience with this, like reconnecting with his Guachil roots.
Mhm.
So basically, he started a group. He wanted to start a group with me, like a descendant group. So we're like, okay. So we started that, and we started getting people that descended from the same tribe, and we just wanted to like preserve the culture in the sense of like, okay, let's gather as much information that we can piece together, like history, culture, anything from scholars, like, and get people together that have the same roots, and then just go from there. It should amount to something. And in that process, we discovered like some of the people in San Luis Potosí that do descend from Guachil. So what happens here is that a lot of these people that live in San Luis Potosí that identify as Guachil, they're recognized by the government, the local municipality of like San Luis Potosí, the city itself. And they had a lot of relatives, like great grandparents or grandparents, that stated that that was their heritage, that was their identity, that's been passed down to them. And so they got really organized about 20 to 30 years ago. And now they try to preserve the culture, and they host like communal events like every month, and do all sorts of like ceremonies and rituals and things like that. So once we found these people, it was just by chance because we were just trying to like go on to all these like watch shield groups on Facebook and like other areas, and just see if we could connect with other people that were like-minded, right? And
Mhm.
that's where we ran into some of these people that still lived in San Luis Potosí, and they were identifying that way. And so that's when we just started talking. And eventually, they invited me to go down there. So that's when I went down there to meet. And I met this guy named Alexis. He's like the historian for the Guachil people. He's
Mhm.
very, very knowledgeable. But yeah, he hosted me in his house. He's a very gracious person. And it was just amazing. Just go actually see like where I come from. Like, because I wasn't born in San Luis Potosí, but it's only a few generations away from my family tree that my
Mhm.
ancestors did come from there. But it was great just seeing like exactly like this, put the an image to the name of the cities and the places like the records were stating, and you even see the churches and go inside the churches that the records like the records that I like discovered from the 1700s to the 1800s. I actually got to walk in there and see everything.
That's awesome.
So
Wow.
Just to comment on that, at the beginning, they were very open to letting you in, right? Do they continue to be very open with you and accepting?
yeah, they were pretty excited, like at the fact that there was even like people in the U.S. that were interested, like that were descendants, that like they thought that that was great, they were surprised that was even a thing, like
Mhm.
that the idea that anybody would even be interested in those roots that lived in the U.S.
Mhm.
And that's
So
awesome too, because like that's kind of the same journey that my dad has had, because my dad did all the genealogy for our family specifically, and that's just one clan, of our people. And my dad started trying to get the recognition process going here in the United States. And as that was happening, other groups of our people that have been displaced throughout the country started to get in contact with him, and we found out we had relatives in California that were doing ceremony with the Pomo, because we have similar ceremonies, and come to find out years later that we actually have the same root language as the Pomo. So that's wonderful. You guys are connecting that way and trying to connect with other groups.
I'm still kind of just in shock, and I think it's
Yeah.
beautiful, and I think your ancestors are very proud of you. I think they were proud of you even before your accomplishments. They're gifts. And so I just think it's a beautiful story. And I wanted to ask actually, if you wanted to tell us, like, where can people contact you if they want to hire you for genealogy services,
Right.
and if they want to buy your book because you are a published author?
Oh, I really appreciate your words. Very kind. I was gonna say for the genealogy services, I have a website called ancestralspot.com. So if you just type it in exactly like that, it'll take you to my website, and
Mm-hmm.
it gives you all the information. And I got receipts on there if anyone doubts on everything. I put it all out there.
And we'll make sure
But
to put it in the comment. I mean, on the comments in the
Yeah.
info.
Mm-hmm. Go put in the
definitely.
Yeah.
information.
And then, or you can just go to my TikTok, just Arid American. It's just all together, and the website links on there as well. And then for the book, it's just Golden Skies. That's the name of the book. And if you put just Juan Zapata as like the author, it'll
Mm-hmm.
pop right up on Amazon. That's the
Awesome.
easiest way.
I got two questions, and they're not necessarily off topic, but just kind of to the side there. But one is, in your genealogy and your research about your ancestry, did you find that you were related to any of the famous Mexican Zapatas, the revolutionary leaders,
Uh,
Emiliano or
I was looking out for it, but unfortunately not. I wish I
okay.
descended from that one badass guy, but no, unfortunately not. I was hoping against hope as I traced that Zapata line, but no. What I ended up with the Zapata line is it was a guy named Jose Teodoro Zapata, and that was baptized 1802, Ciudad del Maíz, San Luis Potosí, and he was listed as a Indio del Valle de Dolores. So,
Oh, okay.
so it traced to him, and then I lost a line right there. I couldn't go further back.
Oh, I see.
Mhm.
And the other question was actually, it wasn't a question, it was more of a comment, because I guess I could say this for other groups that are out there, because for the other people that are on the other end, probably where I'm at, we're growing up in traditions, growing up knowing the heritage and just trying to stay connected. I would say to those groups, to those listeners out there, make sure to be accepting to people who are trying to reconnect, like Juan here and like KP, because not everybody tries to hold safe spaces, for people in these situations. And it's a learning thing, and we've talked about this on the show before about what it means to be an ally in some ways, and also what it means to guide people in the right, on the right paths, and how to be respectful in these spaces. So as long as you go in a good way, like Juan has, as KP does, with respect, everything should be fine. But that's something also comes from the other side too, because there's a lot of older people out there, elders, people who are connected, know these traditions, follow some older, harsher ways, maybe not some of the more, I guess, healthier ways of trying to guide people. So just to put that out there, because we're all on a journey, we're all learning together. Some of us may know some other things than others, but we all have something to offer. So it's really good to help each other out in those ways.
Yeah, and I definitely see like a wave of reconnection and people honestly wanting to know about where they come from, because this country's racism breaks people's spirit. So people are trying to kind of like find that reconnection to heal, because ultimately that's what it is, right? It's healing. And I wanted to ask you, Juan, what is some advice that you would give young people? When I say young people, I mean like teenagers that might be in a situation like you were, where they felt disconnected or they feel lost because they're undocumented, or they feel that fear. What would you tell them?
I would tell them if to just get into tracing the roots. It might sound like silly, but
Hmm.
honestly, had I known even a fraction of the information I do now, I would have never felt ashamed of who I was. I would have felt like very grounded and like reinforced. But because I didn't have anything to latch onto, it was just easy to get hit with all the racism and like feel bad about it. And just you just try to take the punch as best you can. But honestly, like had I known anything, I would have had pride, and it wouldn't have affected me. I don't think, like the racism, I wouldn't have cared, or I would have had good responses to those racist people, like just pointing out obvious facts, like the fact that it's like I have ancestors that have been here thousands of years, and these people came in boats a couple hundred years ago, and they think they're better than everybody, and it's not true. So
Hmm.
it's like, so that's what I'm saying. Like, that's what I would suggest, is to just get into tracing the roots. And it's not expensive, because look, the site familysearch.org is all completely free. You ask your parents, your grandparents, like the names of their parents or grandparents, and you can just start building your tree for free on the
Hmm.
site. You might just have to learn what the cursive thing, but it's not impossible to learn how to read the cursive. Or you can always have a family member or somebody else just help you read it, and then you can just trace it back. And honestly, I can do this because I've gotten good at it, but anybody can just get as good as I did. But honestly, in like 3 hours, you could trace to the early 1800s and find out like a caste label for those ancestors, see if they were Native American, and then continue tracing there. Or if the line ends, then start doing the historical research on the area to see what you likely descend from, and just piece it all together.
Hmm.
So I think it's not very expensive, and I think it's not, and the time you spend on it is certainly worth it. I think it would help them feel way more grounded.
Hmm. Yeah, because history empowers you, which is why I feel a lot of these states are wanting to edit history books. Us being one of those states, that's up for debate, and the way they retell history here in Texas, it's not accurate at all, and doesn't even mention colonization or the brutality of colonization. So
We
it would
teach
lead,
lost cause Civil War stuff.
yeah, so it leads a lot of people to be disconnected at a young age because Texas history is enforced in our state, in our public schools.
Nobody else learns Texas history.
Yeah.
I met a person from Massachusetts that was teaching here at the Texas system, and she was just like, the only thing that we learned from Texas history that you guys are teaching these kids all throughout 7th grade is who mapped the Mississippi River. Like
Mhm.
that's the only thing that they learn, and we learn about all of these Texas explorers.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And there's
That's pretty
statues of
funny.
them
And there's statues of them everywhere.
everywhere. Yeah. So
You
it's
go to Brownsville, they have Confederate streets and stuff like that. It's just
yeah. Even if you go to like our downtown sites, the Alamo,
oh yeah.
they have like people that tell the history of the Battle of the Alamo, and it is a completely different narrative of what happened. But again, that comes down ultimately to colonization, right? And the
Yeah.
effects of what colonization has done to our people in the past and present, right? What it continues to do to our people. And I think that the fact that you basically took what life gave you and you empowered yourself, I
Yeah.
think is like what makes this story just very brave. So thank you for your bravery and your honesty in sharing this with us. I really appreciate your time. I don't know if Pablo has any more
Yeah,
questions.
I just want to say thank you for taking the time to be with us today, allowing us to share your book, your website, and you as a resource with our listeners, because I know this is a big part of what we're trying to do is to help people reconnect. If we can get them in contact with you and help them get to understanding their heritage and knowing more about themselves. Because what I hear from your story is I hear somebody that was dealt the rough cards that we all are, who took them and turned it into not only success but also just a solid self-actualization. Like you know who you are now, and nobody else is going to tell you that, and that's awesome.
I really, really appreciate it. Like for you guys have been very gracious hosts. But yeah, I was just gonna say, like, absolutely, I really love helping other people. That's why I do those genealogy instruction videos on my TikTok. I've had a lot of people like thank me for that because I just want to make it as easy as possible for the next person. Like, you know, I took a lot of time to like try to like get good at it or to like find out all this information, but I want to like make it so concise and easy for the next person so they don't have to spend as much time doing it.
Mhm.
That's my goal.
Awesome. And if you could give us your information one more time, your TikTok and your website.
Yeah, so the TikTok's just Arid American.
Mhm.
Just type it in like that, and it has a link to my website, but the website's ancestralspot.com. So
Awesome. So that's where you can find Juan Zapata. So thank you so much to all our guests for tuning in. Hopefully, this fuels your reconnection journey. Or if anything, just share your experiences with us.
Yeah, put it in the comments.
Yeah, we would love to know different perspectives. And we want to thank you again for tuning in to season 2, episode 2 of the Future Generations podcast. Thank you guys.